Okay, everyone, welcome to our latest episode of The REWIRE, our podcast here at Experience Haus. My name's Amit Patel. I'm the founder, and I'm super excited to have you all here with us today. We're going to be tackling a very, very important topic of data. To talk to me about this topic and to get us going, I welcome Sanchia to the studio with us. Sanchia, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, this warm morning in London. Let's start with a little bit of a background. A bit of a history. How did you get into data? Just let's get us going.
Yeah, let's go. So firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. I've been working in data and tech for about 20 years. I've got a background in maths, queen of the nerds. And since then, I've worked in-house and agency side in design and build agencies, and most recently I was the head of data at Digitas, which is part of Publicis Group, so a very large advertising holding company. And since then I have left the corporate life and started my own thing with my co-founder Manny Moreno, and we have started something called Data Every Day. And it's all about making people feel more confident with data, helping them to find their own story in their numbers, and just to stop being so scared of data. Like, it doesn't have to be big and scary. It can be little and powerful.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to get into some of that. And first of all, I also have a degree in math.
Yeah.
That's
Nerds
a commonality
together.
we have. And then we'll definitely get Manny on at some stage in the
Yes.
future as well. So hello to Manny. We'll get you on, no doubt. You talked about at the end, data anywhere and the scariness of data. So for us as Experience Haus, we've kind of in the last 12 to 18 months really pivoted strongly into doing workflow design with various types of organizations. And one of the things I've really noticed in the room is the lack of awareness, or the lack of kind of the ability to realize how important data is in the entire kind of that journey of designing a workflow. So let's just start there. What have you seen it doesn't have to be over the last 12 months or anything, but in terms of people's ability to kind of recognize the importance of data?
I think it's a great question, and it transcends like all different departments. So it's not just for designers, it's not just for senior leaders, it's literally for everyone. So I wanted to start by saying that. But I think what we've noticed is that people just go straight into the data if they have access to it. And now with AI, data is more available, more accessible to everybody. And so they're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to quickly dig into this and make a dashboard without really thinking through what they're trying to do. So I think one of the biggest challenges is they're never asking the right question.
Right.
And that is only being exacerbated by the access to data, the access to tools to analyze them. You have conversational analytics where you can just say, hey, can you tell me how many customers have bought this product in the last 12 months, without really understanding why you're asking that question, what you're going to do with that information, and how you're going to measure whether anything you've done has had a positive impact.
Right. And do you think that the organizations are spending enough time on training up everyone? Because obviously there's an element of this data that's owned by a particular person or a team or a department. But where do you think training is happening or is falling over when it comes to data?
So I think a lot of the data teams are being trained, but it's often a very technical training. And you don't always get that insight training. So what of it, right? So I used to have a director that every time I would pull some information from him, this was a long time ago, and he would always say, so what, Sanch, so what? And just keep saying it until I gave him the insight. So I think for data teams specifically, there's a lot of technical training, no insight training. And for wider teams, they don't feel comfortable asking those right questions. They don't know what data can do. And there's also this like Rumsfeldian thing of saying of those unknown unknowns, like they don't know what they don't know about data.
Right. One of the things that we've noticed, and a lot of our focus in terms of our work is financial services and professional services. We're helping consultancies who are now taking on bigger challenges, more complex challenges with their clients. and we're having to go in and kind of help them start to think about how do we rewire their clients and rewire their approach, etc. Hence the name of our podcast and our approach. One of the things I've noticed is there is a lack of awareness of who owns the data, and that could be mostly on the client side. So who do I need to speak to? And then, what do I bring this internally, and who's going to help me kind of shape kind of the data offering, the data strategy, the data sourcing, et cetera. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've seen in terms of like the role of data in terms of a stakeholder map? So who owns it? How are people made aware? How does that governed moving forward?
Great question. I think it depends on the size of the organization. So for some of my big clients that we used to have, like Samsung, Monzo, Enterprise Mobility, they've got that infrastructure there. They've got that governance there. But then for smaller clients, you see they don't really have those systems. But regardless, what we've seen is that even if you have the systems, they're not necessarily connected together.
Right.
And that's not just about the systems, it's about the teams as well. So you have one team in finance or something that is doing the commercial reporting, but then you'll have the data and tech team that's doing the web analytics, for example, or you'll have the customer team that holds all of that really rich natural language data, and none of it is necessarily joined together. I mean, I've never seen anywhere, this is a big statement, but I've never seen anywhere that has a perfect connection of all of their data systems together.
Right. And do you think teams are doing a good or companies are doing a good enough job of like really saying this is who owns it and this who's going to be, this is who's responsible for it?
I think some are. I think when it comes to privacy, people are much better at assigning ownership, probably because of the consequences of it.
Okay, right, yeah.
But I think there's, like everywhere I've seen, there's more work to be done.
Right.
And I think it's about, I know you talk a lot about it in terms of having those multidisciplinary teams.
Yes.
So having designers that understand AI, that understand data is so powerful. And it's not about checking other people's homework. It's not about scrutiny, but it is about being able to go to the data team or whoever is looking after your data, even if it's just one person with Google Analytics, being able to go to them and say, actually, can we sit together? Can we work on it together? So I think there's definitely something about everybody at least having that fluency and that language to talk about data.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So that's a really nice segue into the next kind of area of questions. In terms of that fluency, what do you think makes data so scary?
I think a lot of people, taking it back to school, I think a lot of people are really afraid of maths.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
And I sort of feel this quite deeply because I used to and do still do a little bit of maths tutoring.
Right.
Husband's a maths teacher. We always, like, obviously House of Nerds, we're really lucky because we found maths quite easy. And then as a result, you've got those foundations and you're building those foundations. But if you talk to a lot of people, they will just be like, oh, no, maths is not my thing. Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared of numbers. Don't give me numbers. I'm a creative or blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I think there is a perception that data is this hardcore maths and data has to live in a massive cloud database. And I think that a lot of people have perpetuated that because in some cases it is true. Like data science is hard.
Right.
But in other cases, it can be a lot more accessible. So when we came to you guys and we talked to one of your cohorts at Experience House, we were talking about, well, actually, what are those little crumbs of data that are needed to power your journey from home to getting here today?
Right.
And how do you think Citymapper or Google Maps, like how do you think that data is flowing into it? It's GPS data, it's TfL data, it's traffic data, all of that kind of stuff. But if you break it down into something that people can use every day, like they understand that it's not a massive, giant, scary database that you need Python to code in, really, it's the concept, it's a conceptual thing. And you don't have to be good at maths to be good at data.
Right. So I think you've explained that really nicely, and also breaking it down into like a very simple approach to it. Because I think one of the things, I love that you kind of brought up the multidisciplinary thing, which again, I am a huge fan of. And I think it's not about being a generalist, it's about knowing quite a bit about each of the different kind of pillars that will essentially power an AI-powered journey, AI-powered service, or whatever ultimately, or a digital product that you're building. In terms of then learning data, say you're in a team, or or you're an individual within a team, kind of designing a new workflow or designing a new product. You've just talked about kind of being able to kind of sense where that data is, where it's coming from. What do you feel like this is what you should know, and this is what you need to communicate to the data scientist, to the data team? For me, it's, I guess my area of question is like, how much does somebody who's not entirely working with the data need to know in order to then communicate with the team that needs to then take that forward?
I think that we like to break it down into three things. So kind of data powered. So what is the data that's powering your design? So in that city mapper example, the data that's powering that is your location, it's the TfL data.
Right.
What data are you trying to capture? So what data do you need to get from the customer or from the user to power that experience? So this example would be like, oh, okay, well, I need to get to Worship Street,
Right.
And that's the data that you're capturing from the user to make their experience better. And then the final piece, which arguably is the most important, is the measurement and the impact piece. So we talk a lot about breaking down your impact story to say, by making this change or by doing this thing, we've improved this variable from X to Y, which means happy days, we've done a great job.
Right. And so then if you can come with those three pillars, and you've addressed those three pillars, then it helps you communicate better with the data team that's going to ultimately take that forward. Or is it things that you can start to kind of think about and pinpoint?
Exactly.
Right,
And if you have those kind of questions, so you're like, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to make sure that Amit has the most seamless journey to the podcast studio as possible.
Yeah.
How am I going to measure that? And then how am I going to measure that for hundreds, for thousands, for millions of people? And if you start there, kind of like, what do I want the outcome to be?
Right.
And what is the impact of that on Amit, but also what is the impact of that on my business? Because Amit's happy. He's always going to use my service to get from A to B. And then if you start with that, start with the impact or start with the outcome for the user and obviously for the business, because, it's not like we're not working for free. And then it really helps you to be quite laser focused at what kind of questions, because everything cascades from there. People talk about KPIs, but I would argue not everyone uses the right KPIs.
Okay, interesting. All right, so a nice segue there. So we've talked about data fluency, getting over it, being scared, and okay, it's not as deep as mathematical as you might think. The three pillars that you've mentioned that you need to kind of be addressing in order to kind of communicate better with the data team or the engineering team that's going to take this forward. Let's talk about unlearning. Okay. And I know this, you mentioned WhatsApp me this morning saying this is you've got a lot to talk about here. And I think for us, this is fundamental to our approach to designing new workflows or redesigning workflows, because there's so much, and I'm sure you've seen it in the organizations that you've worked with, where you've got SMEs who have a decade, 2 decades of knowledge, and they're asking the so what, or we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
Why do we have to do things differently? Why do we need to kind of approach this differently? So in terms of unlearning, first of all, what does unlearning mean to you?
Oh, this is a big question.
Okay.
I am going to keep it to work time, and then we'll talk about unlearning in my... So for me, it is having the courage, having the inquisitiveness. And really, I think it is about being inquisitive to say, well, actually, why? It's always been done this way, cool, but why? Like, what am I trying to achieve? What is the purpose of this piece of work? What's the purpose of this report? What's the purpose of this analysis? And, I'm not saying like throw everything out. That's not what I mean by unlearning. Right. It's much more around questioning. I think intellectual curiosity
Yeah.
is really, really important. It's what I try and teach my children sometimes if it works. And, Manny and I talk about this a lot. And it's like, it's like being a little kid that keeps asking why. And obviously that can be annoying, but it's really, really important. Yeah. And we as adults and professionals need to ask, well, actually, why is it that way? And if you're given an answer that's satisfactory, you're like, okay, that's cool. It's not broken. It's fine.
Yeah.
Or could we do this better? And really thinking about how you work together as a team.
Right.
And I think a lot of that comes from the culture of where you're working.
Yeah, I completely agree. So now if we now take that framing of unlearning and the culture and the new approach, and you're talking about kind of redesigning an entire workflow. It could be Samsung's e-commerce journey on their website, or kind of Monzo setting up a new account, whatever it is. What do you suggest, or what are your recommendations when it comes to, hey, you need to start doing things a little bit differently, having to unlearn the way that you've done this? Do you have any thoughts, or have you seen anything interesting in that space?
I have. I've seen quite a lot of interesting things. I think the first thing is draw a picture. I think it's really easy to get bogged down and like dragged down into the weeds without thinking. And I'm not talking about a giant bird's eye view. I'm just literally saying, what's happening with the user? Okay, I need a new phone. What do I care about? Like, I always go on about this because I want a small phone and no one makes small phones anymore. And I get really annoyed, but I can't do anything about that.
You can find them on Vinted, by the way. There's a lot of great stuff on Vinted. If you ever, I always look at those sites and like the amount of data that they must have about people's searching habits at midnight, for example, be fascinating.
The drunk purchase. So, you're thinking, okay, well, this is what I want. This is who I am as a user. These are my needs. And really mapping it out. So one thing I always think about is kind of really think about who you're designing for. And it's not just like a basic pen portrait. You can use a lot of data. So to your point, Vinted will have a profile on me probably, and people who are similar to me, and you can start using that data to say, okay, well, this is Sanch, this is what she cares about, this is what she buys at midnight, this is what she sells, blah, blah, blah. And you can start to use that information to say, this is what they want. And I think to bring it back to your actual question of unlearning, it's almost like stepping out of your own box, right? And putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I'm not saying everyone needs to be some kind of empath, right? But it's like literally think about, okay, well, what would be nice for this person? It's impossible to have a lived experience of everybody else, and that's where you can use data and evidence to say, oh, well, this is what would be good for a parent. This is what would be good for a business user. When we did that, when we mapped out that Airbnb journey, and you were a segment, Manny was a segment, and I was a segment. But we're three very different people with very different needs, and especially when it comes to booking a holiday. So I would say that's the first thing is be inquisitive, be curious, and ask those questions. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you kind of, it forces you to lift yourself out of the weeds, because you're kind of like, oh, I never thought about the safety element when you're traveling somewhere with children. Actually, I never thought about the fact that if you're always on the road as a business traveler, you're going to be missing your home, and how can we make this place feel like a bit more homely and not like a sterile hotel kind of thing.
I think you've massively kind of talked a lot about stepping into the shoe of the consumer who you're designing for. And as you were talking there, I started thinking about bringing this approach into like internal workflows again, because a lot of the empathy there is not necessarily about kind of the client or whatever system or organization you're designing for, but it's also about who's doing the role before me, who's doing the role after me, or the step after me. Because when you look at like large organizations, say it's like a Samsung, for example, or some of the banks that we work with, you've got SMEs who just own one slice of an overall journey, but they're never really concerned about what happened before or what happened after. And what's fascinating about data is, what data do I need from the step before? What data needs to be coming out of my step and in a better position to go to this next step after
Yes.
me, right? So in terms of where I'm going with this is now that we have an understanding of like, okay, we're designing for different people, or now we need to understand what's happening before and after me. What changes in terms of like, or what can you be thinking about in terms of the data flow from step to step? Like how do you approach that?
So I think there's obviously the team culture piece, and it's also a systems thing. So if you kind of imagine the way you were describing that, I literally was just visualizing a relay race. But if you're not even looking at the person that's passing you the baton, like it's not gonna work.
Yeah.
So I think there's one definite thing about teams understanding each other's requirements and roles.
Yeah.
So one thing that we used to do at Digitas was we used to do a lot of either lunch and learns, or you would drop into someone's team meeting. So I remember one of the head of UX asked me to go and talk to his team in their team meeting.
Right.
Because you work with some people, on a client or a pitch, but actually you never really talk to the whole team. So I think firstly going in and explaining what the team does, because they may have touched like one very small part of your team capability, but they haven't seen the whole thing. We also used to do this thing which was called the Unicorn Academy at Digitas, because the logo is a unicorn.
Right.
And it was basically taking a few of the people from each team and really showing them, get kind of how the business works, and showing them how the business works with each of the different teams. So again, bringing together that multidisciplinary piece. And data really is the connective tissue. So if you think about one thing that we did a really long time ago for Samsung, but it still like always sits with me, is we had the insight that people were more likely to look at consumer reviews on a particular site than obviously the actual e-com site, or than what was the other one? Or like than a tech advisor type thing. They were more likely to do that. Obviously with AI search, it's kind of flipped that, but let's just go back to the old school example. And we were able to then make a targeted audience to test it. So when I say be inquisitive, be curious, it's kind of like, well, we think this, the insight is telling us this, but is that true for our audience?
Right.
So we see that at a macro level, everybody prefers to look at, what their pals are saying, or like what another consumer's saying. Is that the reality for our Samsung audience? Turns out that it was, and we were able to do a test and we were able to prove it. And it was really, really powerful because we could show this end-to-end journey, like you say.
Yeah.
So the insights person, incidentally, was me. And I passed it over to Manny, who was actually the audience person at the time, because this is how we know each other. And he was able to create that audience. And then our other colleague, Tucker, was the measurement person, and he was able to measure it and test it and show that you have that kind of closed loop.
Right.
And so obviously that's within a data team, but even within a data team, you have these silos.
Right.
And that's how we were able to break it down.
Right. And you talked about, and I'm glad you kind of came back to the word silo, because you talked about systems and systems thinking. I think what's so fascinating in some of the teams that we have worked with, the data that gets left behind.
Yes.
When we like to do our rewiring work or unlearning with a team, we'll typically get them to think about something that's non-related to the industry that they're working in. So, for example, if we're working with a financial services organization, we'll say, let's design a hotel, for example, or design an airport experience. Completely take them away from what they normally are thinking about. And let's bring them something that contextually they're aware of, but it allows them to have that freedom to kind of learn new approaches that they can then bring back into their way of working,
I love that.
or their world of working. So we'll get them to do systems thinking and system maps, but data gets left behind.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of reasons. It's too hard. They don't know where it is. But actually, the most simple reason is that people don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because traditionally data has been this back office function. It's also a bit like mysterious and kind of like Wizard of Ozzy. And I think that people just kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
This is what happened afterwards. So when we'd be doing something for like any of our clients or for a pitch, people would be like, oh yeah, this is my theory. Can you just find some data to like back it up? It was always an afterthought.
Right.
And I think that it takes a really long time to break that and to unlearn it.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is going back to those 3 pillars, like showing people, well, actually, if you had this tiny crumb of data, you could do this massive thing and it would really, really help. And actually, it's not that hard. I think another thing is a lot of people are waiting for it to be perfect. And I'm sorry to burst anyone's bubble, but it's never going to be perfect.
Yeah. But explain that a little bit more, because that's interesting. What do you mean by that? What are they waiting for?
They're waiting for like a perfectly clean database.
Right.
With a perfect workflow, with a seamless everything joined together. And I used to work at the White Company, and we had such great data. Like it was so good. It was brilliant. And it probably still is, because that started as a direct mail business.
Right.
And so they had pre-GDPR as well. So they had like every single thing, and people had to put in their correct information, because otherwise they wouldn't get things posted to them correctly. Like they wouldn't get their brochure and all of this kind of stuff. And you have these really loyal customers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what you find is when it's up to the user to start putting in their information, like it's not always going to be beautiful if they are like, oh, let me just use this like trash email address that I use for all my marketing emails, or let me just put in something funny because wouldn't it be hilarious, blah blah blah, or I'm buying a present for my girlfriend or my husband or whatever, and actually I'm going to put in their details.
Right.
So when you actually get into the nitty gritty of it, you're having to look at these lines of data which have 5 customers, 5 records are the same customer. And you have these mad maps where you're like, I have to map the customer to all of their orders, and then I have to cut it by the category, like did they buy bedding, did they buy swimwear, whatever. And then I have to cut it by the date, by the year, by what marketing channel they came through. Then I want to connect it to customer service. Then I want to connect it to their segmentation. Oh, no, not that segmentation. There's a different segmentation. Oh, actually, they've migrated segments, right? So you can see how quickly something simple as like supposedly simple as one customer record explodes into this mad mess of stuff.
Right.
And it's the job of the data team and the data infrastructure and the data governance to like wrangle that back. But there's going to be points where you're just going to have to accept that people are going to put in garbage into their like personal details. The customer service representative is not always going to be able to update the latest record. There might be a problem in the warehouse fulfilling the order, you know, like all of this stuff. And I would say, you know, I would imagine somewhere like Amazon obviously has like amazing data, but you know, how many times have you ordered something and forgotten to update the address, and actually it's gone to like someone that you sent a present to, or like your wish list or whatever. So all this to say, if you start to think about the actual volume of data that people are having to work with, it's like not surprising that it's going to be a mess.
Right.
And it's never going to be perfect, but you know, it will be good enough in a lot of situations.
So then to carry on from that, if you've got all of that data, say it's Amazon or the White Company. I think the White Company is a great example, right? So if I don't think I've ever ordered from there, but I can imagine they've got, like you said, they've got years and years of data. But then, and so obviously then there's things changing, and then all of a sudden a team comes in, or there's an internal request to say, right, we need to get this into an AI-powered workflow. We need agents doing stuff behind the scenes. What then needs to happen to get that data prepared for that next level of workflow? Because I think for some people that would be very, very scary.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible for our audience. It's like, what then needs to happen to get that data into a place where we can start building or thinking about an agentic workflow?
So it's all about the foundations. I don't know if you've seen that picture is all over LinkedIn with the bridge and the train. And it's like, I'll send it to you after, but there's basically a train going across the bridge. And it's like, this is an AI workflow with perfect data foundations. And then you've got the other one, which is like the bridge is like a pile of rubble and the train's like falling into the like canyon or whatever. So that's kind of how I think about it. It's, you need to have the structure and you need to have the foundations, because AI, if you want it to work properly and not hallucinate, so obviously you need to set the temperature to 0, but if you want it to work properly, you need to tell it where to look.
Right.
So historically, like there's all different ways of structuring data, but historically you will have like different tables. So at the White Company, you'll have like the customer table, and that's linked to the order table, which is linked to like the payment table.
Right.
And so all of these things sit in separate places, but they're linked together by one unique identifier. So like you have your customer number links to the customer number in the order table, which the order number links to the payment, and you've got all these kind of mad spider web of things, right? But if you've got this structure and if you've got rules, then it's much, much easier to have your AI sit on top of that.
Right.
So you're kind of like, you've got your foundations, and then the AI can say, right, okay, you've asked me this question, and I'm going to go in and find like Sanchia's order from 2024, where she bought this bedding and blah, 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 and then I can return it.
Right. Got it.
But I think you also need to have proper scrutiny. And that's where this sort of data fluency piece comes in.
Right.
Because if it then says, well, Sanch spent £5, that's the answer, you need to have people that know that's not right.
Right.
Because like a full bedding set is
Got it.
a hell of a lot more
so
than
the
£5.
testing and right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So being able to do those kind of spot checks, to be able to understand actually this is way off.
Right.
Or like having a good number sense, right? To say, well, actually, we've got X million customers on our database. It doesn't make any sense that only 1% would have bought our most popular category.
Okay. I think we're going to have a part 2 at some point.
Okay.
So, and maybe that's when we bring Manny in, because I think you've touched upon some more stuff I want to pick up on. We've got a couple minutes left. I want to ask you one last question in terms of, you started off the segment today kind of talking about what you're doing now in terms of data anywhere. I would just love for you to kind of tell us what your mission is with the data fluency piece.
Oh, yes, I would love to. So at Data Every Day, we are on a mission to make data accessible and understandable to everybody. I think with AI, making it accessible to everybody is not necessarily understandable to everybody.
Right.
And if you've got this power of being able to access data, you know, not to be like that old Spider-Man's uncle's quote, but it does, like, there is a great responsibility that comes with having this access to data, having this power. So I would say always think about what you're trying to achieve, what's your outcome, and then how are you going to ask those right questions. And that's why I think data fluency is really, really important and will only get increasingly important in the age of AI.
Yeah, and I think it completely aligns with what we're seeing with all of the teams as well. And I think you've made some really good points around everyone needs to understand it, and the foundations and the pillars that you've given us today completely aligns with the approach that we're trying to take as well. So Sanchia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.